everyone. Welcome to episode 5 of the new season of All Things Global webcast powered by Vistatec. I am your host, Dominika D'Agostino.
And I'm your host, Suzanne Frank.
And the All Things Global webcast is meant to inspire compelling conversations and fresh ideas for people who develop long-term global strategies. And who better to kick off this inaugural episode of the new season than our brilliant guest, Nicole Kittle Broe. Nicole is the Director of Localization at Roku, a company that provides digital media devices and is set on a path to revolutionize video streaming industry. Throughout her career, Nicole pioneered localization at some of the largest entertainment companies in the world, including Snap, Blizzard, Riot Games, and Netflix. Suzanne, do you want to give a warm welcome to our audience?
Absolutely. My apologies. Welcome, everybody. We'd like to just say a warm welcome to our audience all over the world in listen-only mode, and of course, our live audience that will be having a conversation with Nicole today on how to build a center of excellence. Domi, first question.
Yeah, so without further ado, let's kick off our conversation on the best practices for building a localization center of excellence. Every great story begins with an origin story, and every superhero has an origin story. So Nicole, how did you start in the localization industry, and how do you usually start on the journey of building the center of excellence?
So I stumbled into it. I worked at Paramount Pictures. In true film and television fashion, I got my job because my roommate was leaving her job to go to the UK. She said, "Do you want my job at Paramount Pictures?" I said, "Sure." And that's how I got my job. Her job was being the fun sucker for Paramount Pictures. We took out the nudity and swearing so that it would fit in seat back, and you could play it on an airline. I'm dating myself here in an overhead, and on TV. And then we had to obviously conform the masters, right? So that you have the proper localization for those newly created masters. And that's how I got started in it. And I just fell in love with it. I loved working with people from around the world. I thought, oh, this is like an actual industry. I had no idea. So I'm probably your only monolingual director of localization out there. But everybody's been so kind and welcoming, and it's been an awesome ride. When I first start off at a new company, if that was the second part of the question, it's really important that I just spend a lot of time understanding where they are on their globalization journey, their localization journey. I never go in with a pre-plan. It's really important to understand the work that they've done and respect the work that they've done to get to the place that they are. And sometimes that work takes over a year, depending on how many products and the current global reach. That work took about 6 months at Roku. And I think we're in the next phase, which is after doing all the studying and research and understanding how we got where we are, we're in optimization and filling the gaps and holes for solutions that didn't yet exist that we are going to need as we grow.
So Nicole, some of the things that you've talked with at Vistatec in the past, you've done a presentation in the past, is, you know, once you do the analyzation of what's taken place and the direction that you want to head, and that you were mentioning that takes about a year, from there, what's your jump off point, kind of key steps to building out this program? Because you've done it so successfully at every company you've been with. What do those key steps look like in your mind? And a second part is, you're very good at getting buy-off from your key stakeholders. So in addition to those steps that I'd like you to talk about, can you also talk a little bit about how you go about doing that? Because you're really good at that.
Yeah, sure. So some of the things I evaluate like right away and start working on right away are, the first thing, this is what I do in my interviews, I understand, is the company ready to be global? Sometimes I've joined companies before and they've been resistant to change, developing for a US market predominantly, and not willing to make changes like not hard coding text or concatenating sentences, or, oh, we're just going to build this for the US now and then we'll ship it globally later, right? So is the company ready for change, and do we have that executive alignment? If not, sometimes it means I have to start with the executive suite in understand saying like, hey, you're hiring a director of localization or a VP of localization. are you ready? Are you sure this is what this means? This is what this inflection point looks like. And these are the things I'm going to ask of you and your team. I'm going to ask you to support X, Y, and Z. And then more tactically speaking, I look to the current resources, because usually when I join a company, someone has Googled translations and hired a company and been like, there, we will throw it over the wall at them and cross our fingers. QA, what's that? And so, I'll take stock of the current resources we have and say, okay, what's the translation vendor you're using? What's the partnership look like? How about the output, quality of the output? Have you done any QA analysis? What's the current state of the product? Is it a high quality experience, a low quality experience? And so those are the things I spend most of my time on really early in understanding if we have the right partners in both the QA and translation space and the partnership in the executive suite. Those are like the key ones I come in and do right away.
Excellent. And I
tools.
think
I forgot to tell you about tools.
yes.
It takes talking about tools too. Like, what's the TMS? What's a TMS? Like, find out where we are on that one. Sorry to interrupt, but that was an important one too. So.
Yes, definitely. I think it all ties in together. And I think the other element of that is the communication across the company. I think we, at localization departments, we are kind of have to be the great communicators as well to pass on our ideas. And could you share your strategies for effective communication?
I think she means share your strategies for effective communications, and she broke up a little bit. So I'll just finish that. Domi, I think you're okay now.
Yeah, sure. So I think in localization, I think this is something we know in the industry well, is sometimes we just happen to know where all the bodies are buried because we work with everyone, marketing and web and OS and firmware and mobile and everybody else is maybe very focused on their sphere, right? So like I'm on the mobile team, so I'm really only thinking about mobile. So I spend a lot of time like level setting processes across the entire, like all products, all platforms, all, user facing content, if you will. And one of the very first things I do is I give the organization that insight. Like if you want to know how something works or why it doesn't work, you could probably ask your localization team and they'll tell you. So I find there's usually a vehicle at the company where you can go and present who you are. And then everybody comes like an all hands or a tech talk. And I get in there pretty early to let people know that we exist. Because otherwise, some of the companies that I joined at the time that I joined them, they've been using internal folks who happen to speak the language to do the translation. That's just where they are in their journey, right? Like, oh my gosh, we need German. You speak German, right? And so I have to let folks know first that I'm there before they can even start communicating with me. And my arrival isn't always, when I'm the first in for localization, it isn't always well socialized, right? It's someone in UX or someone in product or someone in marketing that has been like, I don't want to solve this anymore. I need someone who knows what they're doing and can structure this whole thing from the top down. So that's the first thing I do is I find the platforms that I can stand on and grab my bullhorn and start talking about what we are, who we are, the fact that we're probably going to centralize localization, that we're here to support you. When it comes to communication, sometimes when I'm in the first person, it means that some of my partners will continue to leverage just me even after I've hired a team. So I've learned that really early on, even if I'm the first, I set up like email localization at, even though I'm the only person on the distribution list for a while. Otherwise, you're setting yourself up for failure down the road where they're just going to keep contacting just the single person that arrived first. You're all nodding. I've seen this before many times. So, and here's the localization help channel on Slack. And here's our Confluence page that has all the information about, SLAs and turnaround times and how we work. And I try to obfuscate pretty early that I'm the only human there because I know that I'm working on hiring, 5 or 6 people. And I'm setting myself up for a world of pain if I don't do that, right? Like they're going to only contact me and I'm never going to be able to work on the more strategic stuff. Can't get past the project stuff if I set myself up like that. So those are the various channels that I use. I usually do a newsletter, once a month newsletter on overarching improvements to the ecosystem. We do a roadmap and show folks where we are versus where we're going. I teach everybody about the localization maturity model, and including my team, because I want a company to celebrate where they are and understand where we need to go. And I want my team to not be frustrated and criticize where we are because we're being brought in to take the company along on this journey. So those are all the various communications tools and alignment tools that I usually leverage.
Why don't we open it up to the audience and see who has some questions for Nicole? Feel free to put yourself on camera if you choose to. You don't have to if you don't want to. Does anybody have any questions for Nicole? Nicole.
Yeah. Hey, Nicole. I'm just wondering, you come in, it sounds like you come in typically to a position of where they know that you want to build a team and you have that support, it's already there from the beginning that they hired you to do that. What would you recommend for a corporation where you're brought in, but you're not at the corporate level and you see this need, you see all this need, but you don't have a team and you don't have that support? Where would you start that journey?
Yeah. Well, I think it depends on what part of the organization that you're in. So you make sure you're in an organization, part of the organization, because it could be product or international or marketing or UX. I mean, I've been in every engineering, I've been in QA, and just make sure that the executive you have that oversees that is a champion for the space. And if they're not, just make sure that, I guess, before you join, just make sure the company is ready to go on the international journey, right? When it comes to not being able to get the support, maybe in headcount, which is really hard for us to get in localization. That happens to me all the time. They'll give me headcount. They won't give me headcount, but they'll give me money. So see if they can give you funding, and then you hire Vistatec. You need to make sure that you have a flexible.
We didn't tell her to say that.
No, she didn't. I promise. The point being, you just need to make sure you have a really flexible language partner that will do more than just translate for you, right? So Vistatec handles a lot of my project management for me, and did right from the get-go, because I was just one person and I had 150 people coming to me at once, like, oh my gosh, we're so glad you're here. Can you translate this for me? No. So I think you just need to make sure that if you can't get headcount, maybe you can get funding. And if you can get the funding, make sure that when you hire externally, that you make sure that your project management goes to that external vendor and you focus on building the pipeline by which the execution occurs, right? And I think I spend a lot of time explaining that to my partners when they ping me and they're like, how's that project going, Nicole? And I'm like, I don't know, man. Like I watch it go through the pipeline, and if it breaks, then I'm like, I get in there, with my team. But at the scale we need to operate in the future, I won't be able to involve myself on a project level. When it comes to, I find that the maturity model, I think it's the CSA maturity model, is really effective at explaining to executives who are brief, bright, gone, which is like, give it to me like quick and dirty and then get out, right? Is a really good way to explain to them, like, this is where we are. And then you point to negligent on that and they're like, oh, that's terrible, right? That's like a big, ugly word in red on that grading scale. And I found that's been really effective. And I even was in an elevator with an executive one time, and she leaned over and she's like, where are we on the scale now? And like, so it kind of sticks in their brain, because, metrics and measurement are really important. And it's really important to know what you can measure and how you can measure. That's something else I try to do really early too, is establish metrics and measurement and radiate them pretty regularly, either via a dashboard and something like Jira, or in, some of the many data metrics measuring tools that are out there. I don't know which ones you use, or I do it through my newsletter. So, and then you just keep singing it. So the other thing I tell people all the time, I tell my team, is when I join companies at this point in time, some folks are really excited to go on the internationalization and globalization journey. And some of the folks at the company aren't, right? They were a startup and they get in really early, and that's who they are in their careers. Like, I build things from nothing. And that is really exciting and valuable. And then when you tell them, hi, I'm new and I'm here to scale, and you have ugly babies, and everything you've built is ugly, they're like, oh, I don't want to go with you anywhere, right? They don't want to hear me telling them that something they built won't work for, Germany and Spain. And so I tell my team, sometimes one of the best things you can do, and this kind of stinks, but it's true, is outlast, right? Like, make sure your messaging and your strategy and your approach is consistent, and just keep it consistent. And sometimes you just have to wait for your startup folks to be like, okay, it's time for me to go start something new, and your scalers to join your organization. That's not the most positive and exciting message or best approach, but it's my last resort. Like, okay, well, I understand where you are. This is where we're going. if you're not going to come, like I'm going to find the people that will and have them help me radiate my message. That was an extremely long answer to your question, but did I answer it?
Oh, I appreciate it. No, more the better.
So Team
I
I
Outlast.
have a segue for that one.
Ooh.
If you could elaborate more, because I think this is an interesting topic, when we're onboarding new departments, if you could elaborate more, how do you go about, especially with the ones that have ugly babies? I love that. So especially with those, like, what is your approach? How do you catch them in the act of, like, you're trying to centralize, there is management saying, yes, let's go ahead and centralize, but there are still people using, going about their own ways and doing their own thing and not using the tools and not using the glossary. And, so can you tell us more on how you convince these people to onboard with you and be part of this centralization?
Yeah, shutting down like those alternative channels that have existed that folks are comfortable with is really hard. And I try to use a heavy hand as my last resort, but I do get alignment to use that when I need to. Like, I'm sorry, I'm shutting down your Slack channel. It feels really bad. Like, quick German translations. Ooh, that Slack channel slays me. But I spend a lot of time finding the people in the organization, like aside from the person that is not maybe so willing to go on the journey. I find the folks that are, and I drag them to like the platform presentation opportunities. And I say, now I'm going to present with the mobile team. And then I start presenting with other teams. And then it becomes the new norm inside the organization that like, oh, this is how you partner with localization. And then those folks become evangelists inside the company for us at like a product to product level, right? So if you're struggling with like a product team, another product team is kind of sidling up to them and being like, why don't you just use the centralized operation? It's so much easier and my quality is so much better, right? And so you have to find out who those people's peers are and maybe use a little peer pressure by celebrating where you are having successes in the organization. And I'm really lucky at Roku. I'm in UX, which is the first time I've been in UX, just because we had a really amazing champion for localization in that space. Her name is Margaret Schmidt, and she is top notch. And so I don't have any intent on moving, but sometimes when I've needed to have more influence in other parts of the organization, I've advocated to move into those parts of the organization, because now I'm in your team meetings and now you can't ignore me. And now I'm giving my presentation just like you are in my update and all those team meetings. So these are all like, I feel like I'm giving you all these like sneaky corporate chess moves. But that's what I do sometimes. I've definitely moved into parts of organizations where I'm struggling, right? Like if I can't align with engineering, now I'm talking to the VP of engineering and be like, hey man, what would you think about moving localization into your organization for a bit? Don't be married to where you are inside the organization. It's really powerful that we're kind of like the redheaded stepchild that doesn't fit anywhere. Then we fit everywhere. So.
That's very true. But how do you do about budget with these onboardings? Because sometimes they don't want to, like, sometimes they have a lot. So you might need a headcount or a contractor, and somebody needs to pay and they don't want to move the budget. Like, do you have a strategy for
that? When I've struggled with budget, I'll tell you all the things that don't feel really good. Sometimes the first year is a wash, right? Until you can get to that next budget cycle. And so you spend all your time socializing up until you do that budget cycle. Ours is usually like September or August, around there. So that when you make your big ask for the next year, after the first year you've joined, that's when you can actually make your impact, really. And it delays your impact like 9 months. It does. But again, like Team Outlast, I'm going to make t-shirts. I'm going to wear them to Local World. That'd be great. So I think, again, that make sure that you're in the right part of the organization with as executives that will advocate for you in that space. And if you're really struggling to get budget, I've stolen budget from other parts of the organization when they weren't going to use it, and just going to partners and being like, hey, are you going to use your total budget this year? Can you gift me some? And I've done a little bit of that in the past too, some horse trading. And then you do some kind of under the table deals where you're like, we're going to do your product and not that one, right? If you have to minimize your spend. And then we do a fair amount of that too, like trading off, like whether or not we're going to ship certain features or languages to different markets, which is my least favorite and absolute last resort, right? then when you really can't get money, then you got to go back into the numbers again and start presenting like the total market opportunity, right? Like, I know you don't want to give me X, Y, and Z, therefore we will not be doing these projects, and therefore you're missing out on this potential, seizing this potential part of the market in X, Y, and Z countries, right? And this is the dollar ad. Again, if you can drag it down to like dollars and numbers, then you can convince you can usually convince your folks that work in the financial parts of the business that you need their support in order to grow. You have to attach it to growth.
Thank you.
Anybody else have any questions for Nicole?
Yes, Garima, I saw that has her hand up, and then we had Tim, and I know that Martinho also wanted to say something.
Okay, let's go in that order.
Thank you. I love the discussion. This is exactly the mindset shift as we are discussing here more than anything else. Nicole, you mentioned about making sure we define metrics and KPIs, and especially in the early stages where it takes time to build the dashboards. You mentioned about either using dashboards or newsletters. Can you elaborate a little bit more for us on what are some of the KPIs or metrics that you have used at Roku and the channel that you have used? Thank you.
Sure. So yeah, we spend a lot. I'm really lucky. I have some really strong research partners. We have an entire international UX research team, and they spend a lot of time understanding total addressable market and how resonant the current UI feels for these different markets. So find those folks to help you with this. But you have to get into total addressable market, or TAM, right? And understanding, I don't know, what is the understanding, like how much money people have, expendable income people in my business, expendable income people have to buy something like a Roku or to subscribe to different channels. I'm really fortunate, again, like I said, I don't have to do all that myself. It already exists. But when we talk to someone about localizing into a new language, and that's another thing we should address is, I think people used to think of our teams as just throw it over the wall and they'll translate into the languages I tell them to translate into. Your power comes in looking at the other opportunities out there, maybe other language variants or countries that are adjacent to where, you know, you're selling your services, or you're seeing traction, and speaking back to the organization saying, I think there's an opportunity in X, Y, and Z country, right? So I don't think I know there are localization organizations out there that do that, but we as an industry need to do more of that, take a more active role in pursuing what those next opportunities are. So you're looking at like total addressable market, income for those markets to understand, like, do people have the income to purchase these devices, for example, for Roku? That's mostly the ones that we review. And, you know, total population comes into play with total addressable market. And how much money for us, again, how much folks spend on competitors or something very similar. So for us, it's streaming, like how many people are watching, and this is kind of not a competitor, but because we're kind of a strange product that toes the line between like streaming and hardware, but like how much money are people spending on Netflix in this country? How much money are they spending on Disney Plus streaming? So we kind of look at those things too. So check out your competitors and what they've been able to do in the market so far as well. And then I socialize those numbers mostly, we're not doing it quite yet, but we'll socialize those numbers through our, like a brand new newsletter that we're launching. That's the most effective vehicle. Roku communicates in what they call 180s, and folks send an update about their team every week. I don't know that we have that much to share right now, so we're moving to a monthly newsletter, but that's something that's really important, is to understand how your organization communicates and then to tap into that. Because if you're trying to drag them to something they're not familiar with, like say you want the marketing team to look at your dashboard in Jira, they're gonna look at you and be like, I'm not gonna do that, right? So you have to understand like how you can radiate the information to your largest audience possible. And you may have to do 2 different versions. Like, do you need a Jira dashboard and a newsletter? I don't know. Maybe your engineers want to look at Jira and your marketing team wants that email. So that's really important too.
Did that answer your question, Garima?
Thank you. Yeah, and I love that sometimes dashboards can be overwhelming. So making sure that building out the insights from it and channelizing that to the right partners is extremely important. But thank you. That's really helpful.
Yeah, I think the socialization is important. And I think Nicole, from knowing Nicole for many years, she's probably one of the more experts in socializing to the various departments and getting that word out there. Tim.
Hi, thanks. Hey, Nicole, you said something that is so unique and so interesting, very close to the beginning, and I don't want to let it slide. I'd love to see it emphasized. So your comment was around how ready are you during the interview phase? And that is really cool. And I wonder if you've ever gone the next step. And I just thought of this. It's something I, would ask people is prove to me you're ready. In other words, you begin to get the data around that. And I don't know if you've ever done that. Sorry, I'm kind of gushing over that. How ready are you to have a localization program? So don't know if you can comment on if you've asked people to prove it or not. Thank you.
I haven't, but I love that. That's like next level. I've definitely turned down, moving forward in interview process because I didn't feel like I got the answers I needed, but I never framed it quite in that way. It was more of an inquiry of like, oh, is your CEO line? What are your pillars for growth for your company? What are you focusing on in your next year of business? And it's definitely been like, oh, we're so excited to ship this thing in the States. And I was like, then you don't need me yet, right? Like I'll see you in like 4 years. So no, but I think we should be teaching people in the industry to ask those types of tough questions. And I'll tell you, the industry for us right now, I've never seen so many director of localization, director of globalization roles, right? Like I think organizations are starting to see us less as a servicing entity and more of a business partnership. So to be honest, you should be holding your interviewers accountable to come at you with that type of information to show that they've done that legwork and been like, okay, yes, we're ready for this. And this is why there is a director role posted or a brand new like program manager role posted for this part of the organization. So I love that. We should challenge everyone that way.
Absolutely. I think asking the tough questions is probably key to understanding if you want to advance or not. So good answer. Tim, did you get your question answered?
Yes, I did. And also thank you for using the word alignment versus evangelize. You keep saying alignment, and so right on. That's a great one for all of us to remember.
There you go. Martino.
Yes, thank you. Hi, Nicole. You talked about identifying the size of the opportunity through TAM and competitive analysis. How do you go about measuring impact, and how does localization have an impact on key business metrics, or whether that's something important for Roku at this point, and you have support from data science organization to justify further investments, et cetera, et cetera? How do you go about, impact metrics?
It's really hard to tie that, right? Because localization is like the lights, I would say. No one complains unless it's really bad, right? And so even if you go to customer support and try to measure the number of customer complaints about localization, you got like one linguist emailed you and was like, wrong choice of words, right? And so we have to get really, really, really sneaky and tricky. So sorry, my daughter is in the background. So here's a sneaky way for think like a dubbing or subtitling. We can look at when someone when they're watching a translation or a dub or a subtitle, when do they leave? Like watching those abandonment rates, for example, like, oh, you see this, like the quality of this subtitle is really bad and people always leave at this mark. So let's watch it and like see while people are leaving, for example, this title more than they're leaving this title up here, which was done by a different vendor, right? And so then you can start to connect it to like hours watched, minutes watched, right? Like, oh, okay, well, when we use this vendor, which we kind of know is giving us better quality, we're actually seeing more hours and more minutes watched of content. Really interesting. Could be related to the content, could be related to dubbing and subtitling, and then you got to kind of triangulate some other metrics and figure out like, okay, let's do like, I forgot what it's called. MDQF. Did I get all the letters right? To understand like how many errors you're seeing in different types of content. So that's like a sneaky way for like dubbing and subtitling. And then you have to kind of look at churn, right? Maybe looking at churn rates in a different market, and do your churn rates, do they match? Like, do you have the same churn rates you do for Italian as you do for German? If not, why is Italian churning so much more? Is it because our translation is bad, or is it something else? Let's go figure that out, right? So you have to start connecting it to like almost the failings in order to highlight why investment in quality localization would lead to success, right? If you don't, this is what will happen, right? Like the warnings that you can give folks based on what you're seeing in engagement with the product. You can't use the the failures reporting until you actually start doing a lot of stuff in the market and you have a lot of that like data to look at already, right? So early on, you can use some of your competitors, some of like for gaming, there's that story about when they translated a game from, I don't remember what game it was. They translated a game from Japanese to English and didn't use a native English speaker. And the translation is very famous. I think it was all your base are R's now, right? And so that there's a two-part thing there, right? Like the first part is you can show like what bad translation looks like. And that helps explain to people who maybe are from the States, if you're working with them, headquartered in the States, speak only one language, what a bad translation means in their language, right? Which isn't something that is more common. It's more common for us to go from English as a source to another language, right? So those are some of the tricks I use. So it depends on what industry you're in. It depends on what product you're selling. If there's hardware, if there's software. Yeah, I don't know if that answered your question.
Martino, did that answer your question? Do you have a follow-up before we go to Rachel?
Yeah, I mean, definitely those are strategies that we've always had to use, but we could talk a lot more about how do you tie them to growth metrics for the business as a whole. So not so much about this is what good or bad translations do to the business, is whether should we localize or not. And when we localize, what are some of those key business metrics in a region that move, right? Because we invested in localization. I guess that's also something that I'm very curious about, and something that I think we all struggle with to show the value of doing it, not so much whether you do it wrong or bad, is do we invest there or not? And does it move the needle or not? So could be a long conversation to have.
It is, and I don't think I have a perfect answer there, right? Because it is so nebulous. I've been really lucky at the companies that I've been at, that alignment, folks have understood just intrinsically that that's something that we need to do. A lot of the leaders in the international space speak these other languages and are frustrated that their grandmother can't use the product that they make because she only speaks the native language of the country in which they reside, right? So I haven't had to do too much convincing. It's a widely accepted notion that we should. But I think, and so you're getting into the space where you get to actually impact business decisions, which is really cool. And I think for me, if I was in streaming and I was trying to decide if we were going into, like, we're not in Romania for now, right? We would look and see like what's the engagement like in native languages for different streamers in English versus Romanian. Like, do we need to localize there? I'd probably start doing some market analyses like that. That's super hard. I don't think I have a great answer for that. And because of the subjective nature of translation, I don't know that we will ever have a perfect answer there. It's not a satisfactory answer. I understand that. Maybe we should start talking about that in the industry some more.
I think so. Thank you, Nicole.
Yeah.
Thank you, Martino. Rachel.
Hi everybody. Hi Nicole. First thing to say is this is a really lovely and quite affirming call to be on, like listening to the challenges that everybody's facing and really recognizing a lot of them. So thank you ever so much for the invite. It's really great. This is quite a specific example. So Nicole, I'm not sure if it's something that you may have come across. I'll put my hand down. So within an organization, I don't know if you've had a situation where you've actually got internal teams already based around the world as copywriters or translators within role, where you're in a situation where you are delivering and stuff's getting done and the cost is kind of hidden because it's sort of hidden within that people cost. And then when you do start to look at, but it's not scalable is the bottom line. It's not scalable, it's limited numbers of people. And when you start to look at it being scalable and looking for maybe outsourcing or different solutions, it can be a real brick wall, because effectively the business is seeing that it's being delivered currently, so it maybe doesn't see the need, and even then presenting the costs around scalability and being able to do more or push more suddenly looks like a massive cost to the business that they're kind of not used to seeing. So I appreciate it's quite a specific example, but I wasn't sure if that's something that you'd experienced at all.
So is it you have internal folks covering those languages? Did I get that right?
Yeah. So we've basically got internal copywriters and translators in every market. covering the work, but from a scalability point of view, and it also perpetuates some bad practices, if I can be really honest. But getting out of that place is a real struggle.
Yeah, so I'm gonna be honest with you, I usually sunset that model. Now, because of the very reasons you're saying, scalability, they'll ping my folks at like 2 o'clock in the morning. I just need this one word, you know, like those are the bad practices you're gonna see. Yeah, so I usually sunset that model, and here's how I usually do it. It sounds like you have some executive challenges there too, but this is what I usually say, like, this company's going to grow, right? No one can disagree with that at your company. That's why they join their company. They're excited about it, right? I want to set up something that scales so that I can continue to deliver you high quality localized experiences, right? This is what this looks like, probably with a model where you have a fair amount of external support by partnering with a vendor, right? And then for the folks inside the company that have been doing this work, that are dedicated to those individual languages, this kind of like the traditional model we all used to employ way back when. This is a hard transition for them too. So it's really important to have a lot of empathy and kindness in this space. And maybe some of you are translators and have been through this journey, but this is for them, their opportunity to skyrocket in their career. So that's when I bring them on board to move beyond just that. And you may not be able to convert someone, because if they've been there a long time, folks are going to be really used to going to them, and making this change for them is really hard, but you get to bring them into working on the pipeline versus working on the language, tactical execution of the language. And you might have to do it in phases, like, oh, you're not actually going to do the translations anymore. Now you're just going to ensure the overall language quality, right? And then you roll them back from the overall language quality by bringing in a testing vendor that actually going to do the quality assurance, right? And now they're just focused on the pipeline by which everything gets localized, right? So it's this gradual transition for them. It's super good for their careers. Not everybody's going to want to go on that journey. You probably have some mixed linguists in the mix that's what they want to do. That's their passion, right? And so that's when things get difficult, and you probably have to sunset some of the folks that you have. But I don't envy the position if you're in that position. Now, if you're in a position where you'll have to convince executives that while it looks like they just have these 5 heads, that's all they need to worry about, and they take care of all your translation, you just have to lean into scale. You have to educate people about how many words people can do when they translate a day, do some math for them, back to numbers, right? Back to metrics, back to data, and say, are you planning on making more? This is how many words we have in our current experience. If you're adding 20% to the experience for the future, this is how many words we're going to have, like, and then do the math and say, look, like, this person's already been working like 2x, or you have to hire 2x headcount. Let's just move it towards a vendor-based model. And this is my plan for migrating these folks and leveraging differently for scale. You have to tie it back to scale. I don't know what company are you at? Maybe you don't want to say.
I work for Lush Cosmetics.
Oh, okay. I don't know what your plan is for global takeover, global domination. But yeah, I don't know if that helps. That's what I've done in the past.
No, it is really interesting, and I can definitely see the value in the steps that you've outlined there. And yeah, it's just a challenge. I mean, because we operate in 50 countries successfully and have done for X amount of time, it's a hard sell. But as I said, those bad practices, particularly around timing, like you said, you know, putting pressure on people to turn stuff around in quite unrealistic deadlines, seems to be my main role at the moment. So it would be really great to try and transition away from that, because there's only a certain amount of favors you can pull in. But thank you, that was really helpful.
Doesn't it get to the point, and this is kind of both for Rachel and Nicole, doesn't it get to the point where it's almost like you have with a company, you have a localization company within your organization? As you mentioned, that's what you're managing now. Isn't that costly? I mean, it just seems like for us, as on the language services side, we look at that and we're like, isn't that expensive to manage and maintain?
I think if I pulled the data and the figures and centralized it as a cost, then I think the business would start to see it as more costly, and that might be something that actually I do after this call and start to look at it that way. But because the way that Lush is structured is on a market by market basis, as a percentage of a market, it looks very small, because it's just part of the operational costs for that particular market. Whereas if you start to look at a centralized model, I think that's when we could potentially start seeing. And also there's the opportunity cost. So the things that we're not able to do because we have very limited resource.
Makes sense.
So you're leaving work on the table and not able to do
Yeah.
something. Oh, that's that. Oh yeah, that's your hook right
Yeah.
there, right?
I mean, you've got that we managed to deliver the top priority urgent stuff, but there is a whole raft of additional stuff that we could be doing, I think, that we're not. So yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, Rachel. It's very interesting. Who has another question for Nicole, or does anybody from the listen only audience want to post a question?
I have one question, if I may, as we're waiting for other volunteers. So I love, first of all, Nicole, the language that you are using. I kind of noticed, how you call everybody partners, both within your organization, the vendor side of things. And I imagine that there is like this third element of managing your own team as well. And I know that throughout the different companies, you have your own teams. So what kind of, I don't know, advice, career advancement strategies do you adopt towards them?
Yeah, they're not project managers ever. I've rebranded at almost every organization. I was able to rebrand them as producers. And then I think I don't know if these numbers are still real, but 80% of the industry is female and 80% of the leadership is male, right? And so the numbers are completely flipped. And so I rebrand them with a powerful title that puts them on the same brand, internal folks, on the same platform as anybody who's owns a product or is producing an experience. And then I have a lot of t-shirts, but one of my t-shirts says, producers sit at the table. So when we used to work in an office, mostly in gaming is where I saw this started to happen. There'd be a main table and then there'd be an overflow bench of seats. And I would walk in the room and my producers are always sitting on the bench, even though there's tables, like seats open at the table. And so just empowering people to be like, you belong at the table, like producers sit at the table, right? Like your contribution is not, and this is an important one, a service contribution, right? Like that's a bad word inside like a company like mine, because they'd be like, oh, you're just supposed to show up when I need you, right? Like Center's going to show up when you're doing something wrong. It's not going to build a global product, right? And so you are a support, you are a partner, but we don't allow ourselves to be branded as a service internally. This is really good for the careers of folks that work inside my teams, because they get to have like the conversations, like face-to-face conversations with folks that have the same titles as them. I think that's really important. I saw someone wrote oof in the chat. Did I say something that was controversial? Maybe.
When you said about the flip, I think.
What
yeah,
did I say?
When you mentioned, yeah.
Women and an 80% men leaders.
Yeah.
That was,
Oh.
and then I like a lot that you don't call it service. I feel like that's really powerful.
Yeah, I try to stay away from that as much as possible. I spend a lot of time correcting people in the first 9 to 12 months I'm here about what we are. And then folks say to me, oh, you don't need to be involved yet because we're not done with it yet. I'm like, if you are involved me when you're done with something, it's way too late. We all know that, right? But our folks upstream don't know that. So, I really embed my team upstream so that they can contribute in cultural ways, right? Like wrong colors at the design phase, so that they're not allowed to wait until engineering is done to send it to us. I'm talking about software right now. So I think that's a really good opportunity. And I have to, whenever I start a team, I feel like I have to spend a lot of time teaching folks how to engage upstream like that, because we are so used to being a service, right? And I have seen folks that have gone from the vendor side to like the internal side. It's a really tough transition. I've seen them struggle sometimes because they're so used to just being in the position where they're only allowed to wait for what lands on their plate. So when I work with my vendors, it's very well known in my company that no one in my company is to treat our vendor as a service. Like if someone at my vendor who's a project manager or even a translator sees something that's wrong, I want them to make noise And I want our organization to take note and fix it. We just did this with, so I'd be giving away too much secret to the sauce. We just did this with French Canadian tone. A long time ago, someone decided French Canadian tone for Roku was going to be informal. And our translation team went ballistic and was like, absolutely not. As soon as we brought Vistatec on, our new translation team. And that was widely celebrated. They made the change based on what the translation team advocated and said, because there were no native French Canadian speakers inside the company, right? And so we need to empower people like that, because it's also really good for the translators to have that type of experience. I think I can do what I can for my team, but I can't do much in my current position for the translators besides give them those type of opportunities. And anybody who's a buyer on this call, we should be giving translators opportunities like that. We should be using them beyond just what they can provide for us in word count. That wealth of knowledge isn't being tapped into throughout the industry, and I think we should change that. Plus, then I can bring them over to my side one day when they want to come over.
And she will. I will say from the language services side, I'm not supposed to use services, the language partner side, I'm learning that it is very win-win working with Nicole at any company that she's been with. And that's the beauty. I think often that, you know, on the client side, you guys get afraid of salespeople and you get afraid of, you know, making mistakes and hooking up with maybe collaborations that long-term don't work out. And what's nice about Nicole is that empowerment that she gives to the vendor to push back, make suggestions, recommendations. In the end, she's the client. And of course, we're going to listen, but she's empowering. And that's beautiful for a successful relationship. And to watch her team flourish and grow through our recommendations and our empowerment is just rare. And so that's the beauty of working in that kind of environment with somebody like Nicole. Very often there's kind of this isolation and, oh, vendor bad, you know. So that's not the case here. And it's just it's so refreshing to work in that environment as a partner with Nicole. So that's all I wanted to say. Anybody else have any questions?
Don't have a question, Suzanne, but I'm getting a t-shirt that says producers sit at the table printed immediately. I think that's fantastic, Nicole. I love that saying.
Yes. And everyone deserves a seat at the table is what she says. So there's empowerment there at all times. Go ahead, Nicole.
No, I was just going to say that it also continues with the metaphor that we started with, you know, going from Hollywood and the origins, and now we're kind of adopting some of that also terminology, right, from the world of the movies. But yeah, Nicole is in LA, in Hollywood, so rightfully so.
Exactly. Exactly.
There's one other thing I do that's communication that's kind of related to this topic that I didn't mention. And I think we just really started doing this at Roku, but I've always wanted to do it. This is the first opportunity I've had. So when I joined Roku, a lot of folks internally had been doing the translation because I happen to speak that language, and it was just at that inflection point where they actually needed to start solving this professionally. So breaking the habit of people going to those folks and breaking those people being like not having their hands on it, right, is a little bit scary. They don't want to let go. And so we introduced meetings between our testers, our translators, and those folks internally who are working on those languages, which is not something that is commonly done for a variety of reasons. But I think it's been really successful because I'm trying to get ahead of like those folks that have worked on the language experience for a long time coming to me and they be like, I don't like this translation. I don't like this translator, right? And so I want them to have more context and the ability to weigh in earlier than to just come at us later with bugs and opinions, right? Those opinions are still valuable. I just want to mine them earlier. And again, this gives the opportunity to these translators to have this engagement with the folks that are developing and creating the product. The one thing I'll say is when you do that, and we should work on this in the industry, a lot of our translators, like, it's a different profile, right? These are artists and they're creators. And I shove them into a boardroom with a bunch of like very stiff numbers people. And it's an awkward conversation, right? Because the translators are passionate and fiery. And maybe the person that's from Roku is from the States and only speaks one language and doesn't understand it, hasn't traveled a lot, doesn't understand spicy passion from X, Y, and Z country, right? So I think it's really interesting for the translators to have that opportunity to see what it looks like to create the thing they're creating and what those people look like that are creating the thing that they're translating for. But I do think in the industry, we need to spend some time with our translators, finding out who wants those opportunities and giving them some training and being like, this is a great way to sell your ideas in these types of meetings. Because I've definitely had to do some recon on the back and then be like, oh, you just need to understand they're very passionate about their language and now you've offended them because we are doing this and it's not good for their market. So I think that's something that I'm not seeing a lot of, but I want us to be more creative about that and let those opportunities happen in the future. And I just think there's lots of things. Sorry, that's my daughter. She agrees. I don't know if you can hear her.
Darling.
So yeah, I think there's lots more opportunities like that for better collaboration. And I think that prevents people from just hucking it over the wall because now they've seen the face and now they've talked to that person. Now they can reach out to them in a more holistic way than just do the translations. I don't want to hear anything else. So.
Thank you, Nicole. Anna, did you have a question?
I was like totally resonating with what you're talking about, like moving from being a service within the company to a more strategic partner. And we've been working really hard on our team to get to that. But I think the problem that we're seeing is we ourselves like don't even believe it. I think that we are in that part where we're a strategic partner to the company. But then when we're asked, what do you do? Our answer is like, oh, we do translations. So I was wondering if you had how do you introduce yourself as, when you're working with a new partner within your company, like how do you express the value that you bring to the table and the strategic part of your team when you're introducing yourself to new partners?
This is what I say, because they think you just do translation, right? I say, well, so I'm your director of localization and I'm here to ensure you build globally resonant experiences. And then they're like, what does that mean? And I'm like, well, to very simplistically, of course, you're going to say that it's translation, but we're also going to make sure we're doing cultural view and that what you built really resonates with users in other markets so that we can get the broadest mind share possible and broadest market share possible. So I tried to stay away from, I get to it before they can get to it. Like I take the translation part and I'm like, yep, we do that. We're going to put that over here. And I'm going to talk about how we're going to take your product around the world. So, and I think that's what you should celebrate in the activities that you do, right? You should be very clear in saying like, we rebuild your experience for a global audience, because you're going to look at colors and you're going to look at like icons and all those types of things as well, right? And that's way beyond just translation, which is so important, of course, and at the core of what we do, that onion where it's like translation and localization, then internationalization, then globalization. But I use the onion a lot, that diagram. I use that onion to describe what we're trying to do. Internally, we impact a lot of the processes and, for example, like my engineering team is able to like build something just for the States. Not anymore since I got here, right? Like that's going to be a discussion if they only build something for the States. So really you're about bringing everything that we build to as many users as possible.
Did that answer your question, Anna?
Yes, thank you.
Anybody else have any questions? We're at we have about 3 minutes left. Does anybody have? Carrie's sick, so she wrote a thank you for coming, Nicole. Our paths have so many similarities, it's scary. Great tips on how to improve on all aspects of a career, position, and department within a company. So yeah, I agree. And you're just your communication style. I mean, I would consider you to be, I've been in the industry for 12 years, going on 13, and you probably are one of the better communicators I've ever met. So yeah, a communication artist, and your way of positioning things that make people feel impassioned and empowered and think about it from a big picture perspective, not just in their little micro world, macro level thinking is phenomenal. Anybody else have any additional questions for Nicole before we wrap it up? Here. Un says here. Thank you so much. You are all communication artists. Yes, that's true, especially Nicole. Very good, very good. So anybody else with any additional questions for Nicole? Any final words on your part, Nicole? I think a lot of people are resonating with your pain and your gain.
No, I just to riff off Martino's last point, I think there's some work for us to do as an industry, right? In terms of a better understanding how we can impact our companies and the decisions they make. So I really want to see those conversations continue in the industry. And I'm looking forward to maybe connecting with some of you and learning more about what you're doing. We're really lucky. We're really lucky to work in localization and translation, and I tell people that a lot. I think, again, like, they just always think that we just do translation, but it's so much more. And I just feel really lucky to be a part of it. So thanks for allowing this monolingual world lover to be in the mix.
Nicole, what a treat. And we thank you so much for joining us today. A quick announcement from our sponsor, which I don't really need to go into great detail because Nicole's already done it for us. As you know, Vistatec does build custom programs for some of the world's largest global brands. And so if you have any questions about our services or offerings, please do reach out to Domi and I. In addition to that, if you have additional questions for Nicole, or you'd like to be introduced to Nicole for further discussion that would help you with your career or help you with your program, as long as you're not a competitor, then we're happy to introduce you to Nicole on that level. So I want to thank everybody for joining today. Domi, any last words?
No, just thank you, Nicole. It was stunning. And yeah, you are, I think, known in the industry as one of the most disruptive leaders out there, always pushing the status quo. So yeah, thank you so much for being our guest.
Thank you very much, everybody. Have a fantastic day, and we'll see you for next All Things Global, powered by Vistatec.
Thank you,
care.
everybody.
Bye.